I'm so glad that we made it. We're
Yes.
fantastic, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So let me then get started. First of all, welcome everyone. It's a great honor to have our guests here, Hamlet Medina and Ernest Chan. I know that at least Ernie is no stranger to Quantopian because for many reasons, one of which being that in 2018, I think there was the second QuantCon conference that Quantopian organized in New York City. And Ernie gave a talk there. I was there, so I remember. It was about it was related to backtesting and some optimization of strategies in backtesting. I think it was along those lines, but probably more interactions even with Quantopian prior to that. But also previous books by him, of course, are very well known for in this community, especially quant trading that has been torn into pieces as so many times I've read and reread the whole thing and the other books. But now, of course, we are talking about this fantastic new book. It is called Generative AI for Trading and Asset Management by Wiley and was published in just May of 2025. So here is the book for all of you, of course, and to see. And I just got out of part one and I'm like 1/10 of part two. So, but I will not be talking about the parts. I will leave that to you to talk about. But so today, I don't want to take too much time with the introductions. You can, of course, talk about, how you got to this point, how you started thinking about this book, and what was the prior sort of prep for that in terms of the work in the quant finance that you've done. But let me just simply say maybe one sentence for each of you. So Ernie is the founder of QTS Capital Management and more recently PredictNow.ai and is the founder and of course chief scientific officer of the PredictNow.ai. I think one interesting thing, and perhaps if we have time, maybe we can ask Ernie about this, because he was for a while in the Human Language Technologies group with the IBM Watson. I believe this is the same place that Mercer and Brown and others were, and then they got hired to Renaissance. And so there may be stories there that we can explore as well. But but that was really exciting to see that part. I mean, I knew, but again, to go over it and see it again. And in terms of prep, because I know that many members of the community are very interested in how and where people get their preparation in terms of education. So if I were to say about Ernie got his bachelor's degree in physics from University of Toronto in Canada and a PhD in physics from Cornell. And he has written, as I said, three books, if I'm not mistaken, prior to this one. So this is the fourth. And those are quant trading, algorithmic trading, and machine trading. And Hamlet Medina is the chief data scientist in Criteo. Is that correct? Criteo?
Yes.
And specializes in time series forecasting, machine learning, deep learning, and generative AI. And the degrees are in electrical engineering. So I love that because my first degree was also in electrical engineering from Universidad Rafael Bello Sochacin in Venezuela, and two master's degrees with honors in math and machine learning, and a PhD in physics. So physics plays still a dominant role in this space. And of course, you have to, anybody here and later on, people who watch this offline, please ask questions to him about Numerai and Kaggle because he has the expert status on those platforms, beating those challenges and scoring really high points there. So with that, it would be a good time to get started. And feel free to talk about anything that you like in the past that brought you to this point. But really, I think the first question that I have, and at some point I will just switch to the audience for their questions. But the first question I have is that I always ask the authors of books, what was the genesis of the book? What motivated you to write this book? What was the first time? When was the first time that you thought about writing such a book? And how did it happen that the two of you got together to write this book together? So,
I can start, Ernie, if you want. Okay. So Ernie and we started some conversation around 2022, 2021, I believe. The idea, so we started to get in touch to basically Ernie offered me to help him basically do the practical aspect of his workshop in machine learning in London, no? And that was the main idea. And in that moment, COVID arrived, so we couldn't do it. We delayed it for 1 year. And after, so there was not so much interest, and we wait a little bit.
Mm,
I will say 2 years later, we were still in touch, no? And Ernie proposed me, so are you working in generative AI? You know that basically there is this wave about how we can apply this to finance. And I said yes. Basically, we say, why not instead of basically delivering the workshop in machine learning
mm,
for finance, we do something in generative AI for finance, no?
mm,
We started to work basically in this workshop, no? That we finally delivered in September 23. And there, basically, in our meetings, what we wanted to develop was an interesting use case where we can apply basically the whole machinery of what we see now in generative AI for probably generative creating a trading signal. No?
mm,
There is what basically we came up with this demo. Basically, it was not completely original. Basically, it was inspired by something that was done at the moment in JP Morgan, that they were using like some speech of the Fed Reserve to forecast the interest rate. Basically, this was the main idea. And we wanted to push it a little further, like what if we can do like that in real time? So
mm.
imagine that we are listening to the Fed speech. Basically, Jerome's power at the moment was delivering the outlook of the economy. So to make a long story short, so we developed basically this demo where we are processing alternative data, very complex unstructured alternative data to basically develop a trading signal that we can validate. No? That is the main idea, that we can validate the performance. We delivered this workshop in 2023. We have a very good feedback. And after, so we had some conversation. Why don't we write a book about generative AI? So on my side, I was with the idea of writing a book for a long time. In 2019, I was offered the opportunity to write a book, but at the moment, it was more in classical time series. And I said, no, I don't have the time, basically. And there are many books in time series, I say, like,
Yeah.
already in this aspect. But in this case, there was basically something new
Mm,
during basically all my studies in finance. So here I am the outsider, no? I read whatever I found in finance in order to do it myself. And after I tried to do some formal studies, and I didn't found like all these materials in a single book, no?
correct.
And the idea was to put like basically all this aspect in a single book and make it accessible for the field of finance. I would say that this is more or less the genesis. So we write the table of content together, we send it to the publisher, and the publisher like it, and we started to write it.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, Ernie, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I'll give, a quick, my take on our collaboration.
Yes.
So yeah, like Hamlet said, I originally wanted to give a workshop on Gen AI because obviously there's, with the launch of ChatGPT in
Yeah.
2022, there's huge interest in what this is about, and I have used it since very early days to see if it can solve financial problem. And I find the performance to be very unreliable, to put it
Mhm.
gently. And so we want to dig deeper into it. And also I wanted to understand what is the technology, the sort of algorithm behind it. As you mentioned, Asfan, I was a language modeling researcher at IBM back in the days. In those days, we might call the era of small language model.
Right.
So now we have large language models. What's the difference? And I'm certainly curious to get back into understanding it. And so luckily, Hamlet and I get to know each other, and I wanted to really learn this from him. So I think the best way to learn something I found is to teach it or to write a book with someone who know about it. So that's what we did. So yeah, and actually after writing the book and reading through what the Hamlet wrote, I have a much better understanding or more of sort of intuitive grasp of what this is about
Mm,
and how in particular this is going to be of use to the financial community. And I found that, and I've been to many professional conferences with a lot of quants in the presence, and I still find that it's actually a minority of quants that truly understand the power behind generative AI. It's not about large language models. It is a much deeper understanding of probability distributions than the traditional machine learning books talk about. So that's really I'm very happy with the outcome of this collaboration of writing this book.
Excellent, excellent. And it is very true that I think Hamlet alluded to this, and you also mentioned this, that there was a gap as well. There was certainly a gap at the time that you were, even now, I would think. I mean, I don't know of many books that have been written in the intersection of these two fields or applications of generative AI to finance in a book form. I mean, there are lots of papers. Of every day you see at least 10 papers that are somehow brought to your attention from different
Yes.
channels. But the fact of the matter is that they are not really well organized into the format of a book from which one can learn, especially a beginner person can learn much better. I think I've only seen one other book which is not new. It is and it is not, which is by Lopez Lira, who basically made that original paper. Tang and Lira had a paper couple of months ago, maybe I would say, or maybe a year or so. And then they basically expanded it into a book. So it was the paper that was expanded into a book. But there is nothing quite like this one. And at the time when you started, definitely wasn't, or at least I'm not aware of anything like that. But and you're right, Ernie. I mean, the best way is the expensive way is to write a book in terms of time commitment and how much work with it. But teaching it absolutely. There's nothing beats teaching because you don't want to be embarrassed in front of people. I want to learn everything that you can before you go to the class or
Mhm.
wherever you go. Yeah. So to tie back to what you were saying about the things that I like this idea that you brought up, the connection with the old linguistic models. I remember, in fact, reading a couple of papers by Mercer on these probabilistic models of language and about the translation, automated speech recognition, and this whole probability distribution of what comes next on a set of things that could probably come next that have non-zero probabilities given wherever you are on this conditioned probability. And so it feels like, yeah, there are very few people who see that connection or the ties and how these things connect back to the historical existence that there was. And I don't know, of course, how much of that was behind the success of Renaissance or other type of hedge funds and other things like that. But no matter what, this kind of modeling had this historic presence back in the day. I think 70s, I maybe even. So, but how do you now? So, how do you see this generative AI connecting to as a tool now? Because now we want to think about this as a tool. And as you were saying, on the fly tool that listens to speech and does something and comes up with recommendation, or puts together a portfolio for you, or finds an alpha, or finds a recommendation, or gives you a prediction based on the geopolitical conflict in Middle East or whatever. But as a tool, how do you see this connecting to the existing infrastructure for the quant world?
Image, basically, this generative AI, the way how we see it is like modeling data distribution in high-dimensional space. That is the task that generative AI is trying to solve, no? And there are three main objectives when we want to model, when we say modeling data in high-dimensional space. One of these is like if we can basically develop a probability density of the data. So we try to approximate the probability of the data. The second objective can be like, for example, generating data that is similar to the one that we have in real life, no? And this is the application that we see over the place with chatbots, ChatGPT, etc., no? And the third objective that basically is also important is about representation learning. Basically, this is basically imagine that you have text or an image, a very complex object, how you can represent it, for example, in a few numbers, like in a vector or a matrix, no? And the main idea is that once we have like this representation learning or these features, no, that we can has, is this feature is going to be useful for a downstream application, like for example for doing classification or developing a trading strategies, no? And the way how I like to see the problem is like starting from these 3 points and after or these three mathematical objects, and we can develop like many applications. So one of the, I would say that for the retail trader, we say for the people that are not that they don't have like many resources, we can say, to develop or do some pre-processing of alternative data. Basically, generative AI offer the opportunity that basically you can do alternative data processing in order to incorporate it into your trading strategy very, very easily. That in the past, I think that was something that you need like a lot of resources, infrastructure, a lot of PhD that are specializing in this domain, or not PhD, but people that are very specialized in the typical domain in order to basically try to do some pre-processing of text. Imagine that basically we know that news are going to affect the market, and in the past, or you want to do some sentiment analysis. In the past, something that's simple you can make is like, so you have a list of words that basically produce a positive sentiment, and a list of keywords that produce a negative sentence, a negative sentiment, and you count and you say basically the difference is positive, is a positive, no? But now we have like basically this sophisticated model that can do some representation of the text that you're going to use. And after you can use this representation to see if there is a correlation between this new representation and the movement in the stock market. I think that basically this is very powerful at the moment. And even you don't need like to build all the models in order to do that. There are many companies that are already offering this model for free. And something that we exemplify in the book is like how you can adapt it, no, and build it yourself. So we didn't want only to provide like a cookbook. So this is the model, this is the data. Here you can run it. So in the book you can find some fundamentals that will allow you to adapt basically either the model or do some typical pre-processing as we do when we are doing machine learning or artificial intelligence to achieve the task that you want to, that is your objective. No? This part is about alternative data pre-processing. The other two is like typical forecasting application. So when
Right.
you have probability density about what is going to happen next,
Yeah.
this can be volatility, return, price, whatever we're interested in. So we are doing forecasting. In fact, so the way when I started to see basically this terminology in language modeling, no, in NLP about language modeling. So for people in electrical engineering or tension forecasting or economics, we can think about a simple one step ahead forecast. We are predicting what is going to happen next, giving us a discrete sequence of tokens, no?
Mm-hmm.
And once you have this probability object, you can do also anomaly detection. And basically,
Yeah.
we're interested in what is the probability that this is going to happen or not. In forecast, basically, we can do like when we have how we want to model the probability. Is it going to be a classification, so it's going to increase or decrease the stock market, or we want to predict exactly the size and the sign of the movement. No, basically, these are some typical stuff, and of course the most well-known application that I think Ernie also mentioned is like synthetic data generation. So that this is the stuff that we see over the place. One of the drawbacks, the synthetic data generation is how you can evaluate the quality of the data that you're generating. But this, you can use it basically for stress testing your portfolio, for training new models using this synthetic generated data, that this is called data augmentation techniques, and many others. I will say that basically this is a summary of
Mm-hmm.
what you can do.
So from my point of view, I'm mainly so far a user of other people's Gen AI programs rather than a developer of our own, although I also have a point of view on the latter. But as a user of Gen AI, like everybody else, I have found it to be, quite useful in summarizing papers for me because there are so, as you mentioned, there are 10 papers published every day. And oftentimes the authors of the paper are not the best English writer out there. They are not Shakespeare level of writers. And so, and you have a question. So exactly, where do you define this? Or, what exact table are you talking about? I sometimes have this question, and I would just upload the paper and ask ChatGPT about this. Basically, is the next best thing to being able to ask the author herself. Sometimes maybe even better because perhaps the author herself will not be able to answer as well as ChatGPT. So I find that to be a great productivity tool in prompting academic papers. And also, of course, as everybody know, it's able to scrutinize code or even create code, and that is very helpful. It is less helpful from the point of view of just getting numerical answer out of it oftentimes, because you never know if it is correct. I quoted one example in our book, which is very simple. Here is a time series of returns for a stock. Can you compute the annualized return? And they somehow said that you should multiply by the square root of 252. I say, well, you must have read too many papers about Sharp ratio, so that every time you are analyzing something, you have to multiply the square root. So you can see that if you are asking for answer, it might not be right. But if you are asking for code, at least
Hmm.
you can scrutinize it, scrutinize logic. You can ask for unit tests and so forth. So that's perhaps a safer way for me to gain productivity using these AI tools. So yeah, but that's really as the sort of the consumer of AI tools. Now, but at a more sort of deeper theoretical level, which I alluded to before, how is that a paradigm shift in how we use machine learning modeling on finance? And I think that's something I learned from Hamlet. I grill him numerous times on Slack back and forth to really get to the bottom of it. And I think finally I got it. So,
Oh,
traditionally,
that was nice because that helped me also to explain better.
well,
Yeah.
you're being too
Yeah.
modest. So traditionally, the way that quant finance professional use machine learning is always to train a conditional probability model. So let's say you have some predictors, X. It could be economic variables, it could be time, technical indicators, whatnot. And we want to predict the next day return, which is Y, right? So traditional machine learning say, okay, we need to train this P of Y given X conditional probability.
Right.
And how do you train it? Well, you find a lot of examples of X and Y pairs and feed it into whether it's a neural network or regression tree or whatnot, just as many label examples as possible. That's how you do it. But in the day and age of generative AI, we take a broader perspective. We actually are interested in the joint probability of P of X comma Y.
Mhm.
We actually interested in the distribution of X itself. You say, well, that's something new. We in finance, no one ever interested in the distribution of GDP or the distribution of the volatility. They always want to look for the distribution of returns, right? Well, who cares about the distribution of a consumer price index?
Right.
Model the distribution of these sort of variables, X variables. You actually don't need as many label example as you thought you need to, to model P of Y of given X. And that I find is a profound insight. I just recently read a paper who mentioned that in the context of image recognition. So
Mhm.
they gave an example of training a image classifier to detect if it's a dog or cat picture,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So they say, well, instead of just feeding it millions of pairs of labeled dog and cat images, you pre-train a model on general image data. So you understand what image or animal data, what they look like, build distribution on that.
Mhm.
And then you only need to feed in very few label example of cats and dog
Mhm.
in order to turn this unsupervised model into a supervised learning model very effectively. This is the notion of semi-supervised learning. And that's something that Hamlet had, really imparted this idea in the book. And I felt that was really a paradigm shift in the way that we finance professional can use machine learning.
Mhm. Mhm. Excellent. Excellent. So before I go to the audience, just to piggyback on that, and I know that there are lots of other aspects of the generative AI or AI even of any form or shape of machine learning, even the very simple models, the negative side of things. And you do talk in part one, the no code For those who don't know, so the book has two parts, and if you like, it's the non-technical part is part one, and the technical part is part two. And then in the non-technical no-code part, which is part one of the book, there are these prompt manipulations, prompt engineering, prompt massaging, in order to get, the various to show the various aspects of ChatGPT and how the mistakes that it makes. And there is at times, I mean, it shows that ChatGPT is actually quite problematic in the type of things that it can do, quite disappointing. But to take that a step further, I know, Hamlet, I saw that in fact you work in privacy, differential privacy, maybe cybersecurity aspects. I'm mentioning that because one area where at least traditional machine learning and AI techniques have not been as successful as people hoped or wished or expected is this field of machine learning in applied to cybersecurity, in particular in terms of false positives. False positives that can be quite expensive if you have to shut down the server, if you have to back the data and all sorts of things, disconnect the whole system, reinstall the whole thing. And there are lots of, so in general, what are the sanity checks, validations? This could be when it is a forecasting problem, this could be when it is a suggestion, this could be prediction, this could be, synthetic data. This could be how can I trust the backtesting done on synthetic data? How much can I
Mhm.
trust that? This kind of sanity checks or validation checks and balances. What do you have to say on those topics?
So a very good question, and it's, we say like I will follow up in what Ernie was already explaining. No, and the first part about the false positive, and basically the in general the bad prediction that machine learning model can make, no, and it related to the fact basically how we collect the data for training and how we collect the data at the inference time, no. When we are training the model, normally we clean the data, we make sure that if we are training a classifier that is dog versus cat, only we have dog versus cat in the training set, no? And we have like a very good performance, but at inference time, basically we have an image that we don't know what is coming, no? And it can be like, for example, pure noise.
Yeah.
And the model, because it's normally it's a discriminative model, no? Model the probability of the output given the input. Probability, you know that basically it has to satisfy that the sum of the probabilities must be equal to one. So in that case, our model basically is blind, no? It has been forced to produce a probability distribution and it's going to output a probability distribution. So probably even if the input is noise, it's going to say cat with 99% probability and dog with 1% probability. And this is a very well-known problem that even state-of-the-art models, image classifiers, suffer from that. No, there is a paper that is mentioned in the chapter where you see that basically they input noise into the most of the state-of-the-art classifiers and they produce wrong prediction. No? And generative AI basically can help on that point because the problem is like at inference time, basically we don't have control about the input, no? But when imagine that we are doing after we are analyzing the result and we say no, the reason is because the input basically is not in the training set, so the model doesn't have any ability how to do it. In that case, for example, you can use a generative model that is going to model only the probability of the input, and before basically running the inference model, you can evaluate an anomaly detection model. So what is the probability that this input is in the training set? No?
Hmm.
And basically, you say if the probability of this particular input in the training set is very, very low, basically you cannot trust the prediction that your
Hmm.
forecasting model or
Hmm.
your anomaly detection model is going to make, no? Because it's something completely new. No? We of course we want the model to generalize, no? We want the model to generalize to new inputs, no? But basically the input should be in the distribution, no? Of the data that we put into training. And basically this is called the problem that out of distribution data. No? So an input that is completely out of distribution, the model is going to produce a prediction because we train for that, but the prediction is wrong. So generative model in that case can help you to detect an anomaly, basically modeling the probability distribution of the input that in most of the case for classification cases, the dimension of the input is higher compared with the dimension of the data that we want to
Hmm.
predict. And that so we want to train a forecasting model that use, for example, let's say like 10 features, and the output is Is the stock is going to increase or decrease? Basically, the probability of the output is only one, no? Compared with the dimension of the input that is higher. So, and basically, generative model can help you to do that, no? This is for detecting basically and this is going to reduce the false positive. No, this is going to basically model uncertainty in the prediction. I think that this is something very important in finance. We know that it's very important, but in all the fields, that generative model can help you to model the uncertainty in the distribution. No? And another, I will say, aspect is like to generate new cases. No, imagine that you want to generate new cases that you don't. Basically, you want to be prepared.
Mm,
Another solution is like, okay, you can learn to generate the unconditional probability of the data or the time series that you are receiving at the time. And once you have that, you can generate new scenarios, no? Basically generating new data. And you can feed basically this new scenario, this new data into your model and see how it's going to respond.
mm,
And this is similar to doing like a value at risk analysis, no? That you generate a lot
mm.
of samples and after you put it into the model and you see basically the quantize of the output distribution. No? This is two main idea how we can use it. And the third part, if you want to be robust to that, basically, if you one point there is like we are generating data that we are not completely sure. Basically, it has the same statistical properties of
Mhm,
the
mhm.
data that you are using, no? That the data that we collected. There are many ways how, not many ways, but there are some proxies how we can evaluate the quality of the generated data.
Oh,
But
mm,
the the one that I like the most and the one that I use in my work and it has produced very good results. And also in OpenAI, they're using all over the place. It's like, so it's difficult to trust the generated data for validation, no? But can we use it for training? Mind that if we have our training data, our validation set, and we have our data that we selected for training data, no? Imagine that we add synthetic data, and after we check the performance of one model that use only real data and another model that use a combination of both.
mm,
Basically, it's the second model, model B, that use both data sets, provide a better performance. We can say that the data that we generate is useful, no? Because it's helping you to predict out of sample. And this is one of the best way at the moment, I think, how we can validate the performance of these models. So,
the quality.
and for
Mm,
example, OpenAI use it to do reinforcement learning for human feedback. At the time when they developed this technique, so the new data was human annotated, no?
mm.
And now basically the quality of the generated data is so high, so comparable with similar to the qualities of human annotated that they do a combination. So we are not sure, no, what is the combination, but they use also synthetic data for training these kind of models.
Certainly, there is huge value in having access to something like that, like the synthetic data. Huge value, not only financially, but like
Yeah,
some of the very, like if you were doing nanosecond scale market microstructure type research,
exactly.
and you wanted to purchase any of those, that will be really prohibitive for many individual retail traders or just the beginners and things like that. So when the synthetic data almost for free can do that for you. But again, like that validation, but that's a very good point. Like you are basically saying that if I put this in combination with the real data and I see a better result on the output in terms of prediction power, well,
Mhm.
that tells me that the synthetically generated data is of a quality that is higher rather than lower.
Yes, yes, of course. No, always we work in sample, no, but we say in this sample, in this
That's
data
right,
set
of
is
course.
better, but we say like this is general, no? Even if we use real data or not, we have a validation set, we test there using whatever cross-validation technique we use, or we think that is the more adequate at the moment, but this is normally the way how we test it. And this is a protocol. There are many papers that basically focus in validating synthetic data, and they call train on synthetic, test on real, for example, something like that. It's like keep the real data for your validation if you
For
want
your
to be sure that basically the quality of your synthetic data.
Ernie, any additions?
No, no, I think that, I think Hamlet explained very well. It just, I want to highlight the fact that, he made a very deep impression on me on the fact that, once again, going back to the old way of doing machine learning is that, if you ask the model P of Y given X, you know, it will be forced to give you an answer,
Right.
even though the model may never have seen this particular value of x. But in the generative framework, if p of x is like have almost zero probability, it will just refuse to give you an answer. It will give you a probability of zero. So I think that that very simple idea, highlights the power of this approach.
Yeah, absolutely true. Which reminds me, anecdotally, when I first came, I came from pure math background. I mean, after engineering, I switched to mathematics for PhD, and then it was pure math and category theory, algebra, logic, and things like that.
Mhm.
And then from there, when I first encountered statistics, this exact same point was one of the biggest, I would say, not quite cultural shocks, but something very disturbing at times, where you're used in this world of pure mathematics to things, if you're careful, do things not work if you are not taking the right steps in developing the proof of certain claim that you have? You cannot force it, because if you're truthful to yourself and you're following all the correct steps and assuming you're not making any mistakes, then you cannot take the next step if the next step is not there logically to be taken. And so there is no output, so to speak, at when you're stuck there. When I statistics, you realize that there's always an answer. There is always an answer.
Yes.
Whether it is correct, not correct, worth it, not worth, but there is always an answer. So yeah, that was an interesting point. Okay, so now let me go to the audience. If anyone would like to ask any questions, please maybe just raise your hand so I can see you, and then unmute and ask if you like. You can put it on chat and then I can read it and we can ask it that way. But however you like, however you're comfortable, we are not too many people, so we can manage it that way if you just unmute and ask your questions. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Okay, so one question from Ken Mayer. I didn't see a repository for the code for the generative AI book. Is there one out there?
There is a repository, and the repository is the address is in the book. It's already, today I access it and it's there. So yes, it should be there.
Is it on your site or is it GitHub?
GitHub.
Oh, GitHub, okay. So he says, which page is the
I
information?
think it's citing it everywhere. There are many places.
I mean, I have them in front of me, but I cannot really
I
tell.
think that in chapter 1, we started to mention the GitHub repository.
Yes, yes, in chapter 1. So it must be in chapter 1.
Yes. Yes,
And
it's for sure. Chapter 1, chapter 3 is there. Chapter 2, chapter 4 is also there.
okay,
But
okay, okay,
you will find it's in GitHub, basically.
perfect, perfect.
I just found the first mention of it is on page 18.
Oh,
At the bottom of page 18, it listed the repository as github.com// blah, 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 blah.
oh, Gen I for traders. Right, right.
Yeah, yeah, page 18.
Third row, the sentence from bottom. Yep. All right, good.
I've read your, Dr. Chan, I've read your introduction to algorithmic trading, and I worked through some of them, and I was developing some machine learning classification models. So I'm still a beginner. I just started last year, like LDA, QDA, and SVMs. And I sort of wondered, the return on all of them, the backtesting was terrible. But then the question that I had was, how am I ever going to use this? And I don't know how to use them. So what's the rationale? How do you go from developing all these models, backtesting them, and like, what's the kind of thinking that one should have to employ them later on?
The traditional way of approaching trading strategy development is typically take a causal approach, not a machine learning or data mining driven approach, right? So you have a hypothesis, which is a very scientific approach. You have a hypothesis about some inefficiency in a market. You develop a model to exploit it, and you backtest that model to find out if it works or not. And if it doesn't work, that means that your intuition is wrong. You should look for some other inefficiency. The AI-driven or machine learning-based strategy development is a little bit different. You don't necessarily have a hypothesis. You don't have a causal model of what might work. And you are instead trying to engineer as many, features, input features as possible, the X variable, hoping that you might hit on some X that has correlation with the Y, right? So, but the problem with that approach traditionally is that you are very much subject to data snooping bias. You might be picking up a very weak signal that happened to be in the training set, but it's not in any of the out of sample set. So, on balance, I would say that even today, we find that a combination of both method is where the sweet spot is. So you want to tightly constrain your features or your model based on some prior knowledge. You do not want to just, if it's so easy to build a training model by throwing 100 features to predict tomorrow's SPY, well, there will be no arbitrage opportunity because everybody can do that, right? So you need to have a certain conceptual framework that you develop by testing thousands of models, reading thousands of papers, losing thousands of dollars, and then you get that intuition. And the last one is most important. No matter how many papers you read, unless you lose hundreds of thousands of dollars, you will not learn it. I guarantee you. So the
Yes.
key is losing money. Lose as much money as you can afford it, and you will learn it.
Thank you very much.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Yes, very true. That leaves its mark. That leaves losing money. Yeah, it's so painful that it leaves its mark. Learning is maximized. That is right. Okay, any other questions? And while you're thinking about your questions, so Hamlet, is it correct the GATAM book subtract.com? Is that the blog that is dedicated to this book?
Yes.
And of course, you all know, I am sure, the next one, which is Ernie's blogs. So
Yeah.
certainly,
So yeah, my blog obviously has been started since
yes.
2006, so it has a lot of prior materials on it.
Yeah.
But starting from the point where we published the book, my blog basically mirror the content of the
Oh, I
Substack.
see. Okay. 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 Yeah, I see the first one, deep reinforcement learning for portfolio optimiz. Yeah, I saw over there too. Yeah.
I think
Yep.
Hamlet is publishing a new blog post next week. Am I right, Hamlet?
Oh,
Yes. Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
D-
Yeah.
Are you comfortable
We
telling us about it?
It will be like an introduction to our book. Basically, it will go over each chapter, no? Basically, dipping a little bit about the two parts of the book, how
Yeah.
we did it, that you mentioned. Basically, the first part, we have part one and part two.
Yep.
Part one is a no-code introduction to generative AI. And basically here, what we want to do is like, for example, how we can use tools like ChatGPT to help us to summarize paper as animation, how we can translate strategies directly from papers to code, and how we can translate from one strategy from one coding language to another.
Hmm.
Here, for example, Ernie took like most of the strategies and code written in MATLAB and tried to
Yes.
translate it to Python and
Yes.
figure out basically all the problems that you can have. Something good is like in one of the first. So we developed, I think, this part in by the end of the year 2023. And basically these models are getting better and better every time. And in his first blog post, basically he rerun the experiment using the latest version of ChatGPT to see how it compares. So you can go to the book and you can go to the blog,
To the
and
block.
probably you can go right now and test by yourself with ChatGPT 5, for example, what the result is going to be.
Yeah.
Something that I mentioned also in the blog, no, is that in this part of no code, zero code, no, for generative AI,
Yep.
we didn't want to assume that you are an expert in prompt engineering,
Hmm. Hmm.
have expert coding abilities, no? Something
Yep.
like that. We say probably is an asset manager that basically have a lot of knowledge about how the market works, no? But probably he doesn't like to code. He read a lot of financial news, probably thank you, 10Ks, in order to take the decision that he has, no? Something that I mentioned there is that now you have more of this approach that is called agentic AI, no? That basically you have like many agents that are LLM that are communicating to each other. that can allow you to write better code, can allow you to basically do better summarization of article, can help you to write even research papers and all of that. You can try basically with this specific question to try to solve it using tools, no? And of course, you can basically, these questions are inspiration, no? These are only a starting point for you to develop and develop your, basically ask your own question related to the topic that you want to solve. And basically, this is more or less the same idea for the second part of the book. We provide, I would say, like the main probably the main families of generative AI models that are used as components in many of the current solutions all over the place. And basically, you can go chapter over chapter and learn a lot about probabilistic modeling. And after, take the pieces that you want to apply it to your application. No?
Yeah.
This is something that we do.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And in part two, actually, because I started and I was pleasantly surprised that there is such, at least in the first parts of part two, such, how shall I put it, harmony with Marcos Lopez de Prado's book on advances in financial machine learning. We had a course on Quantopian last semester that I thought I was able to cover part one and two and three of the book up to the backtesting part. And so many things that you mentioned, all the pitfalls that he mentions about various different things, and anything from the volume clocks all the way to, all sorts of things, but about backtesting and things like it was very, very nice to see that, you're also referring to those and, like making people aware of that. And that was also behind one reason why I asked the question about how can we be careful about things that we see in terms of the results of a backtest or in terms of the value of a prediction or things. So what are the new, so to speak, dangerous pitfalls that we have to watch for? And in fact, I know that we are getting to the end of the time, but one thing that came up in somebody sent me a question, couldn't be here, and that is on the regulatory side. So imagining that these tools get really in the near future, if not already, get really incorporated, integrated into the main workflow of various institutions, banks, and other places, then one faces something that SEC will be very interested in pursuing and perhaps finding faults or issuing punishments or whatever when there is regulatory problems with hallucination or other aspects of these large language models that can cause trouble and make the institutions liable. But I'm imagining there is a point where we are kind of feeling safe that, oh yeah, everything is okay, like they are going to determine who gets a loan, who doesn't get a loan. And then we give these loans, and then what happened in 2008? Something not as drastic, but something similar. So there is that whole regulatory space and how one deals with that, which won't be fun. But but I mean, it's the reality is that it is like, people kept criticizing mathematical models of risk for what happened then, that those models were telling us that these were almost not, I mean, practically zero probability of anything going wrong, and that there
Yes.
was not enough built into those models. In some respects, I think that these large language models, with the access they have to everything else, probably are going to be much better in evaluating the risk than pure mathematical models. But nevertheless, they may have other problems that mathematical models didn't have. There is always that here.
So that is a very complicated question. So we don't
Yeah.
know
Well,
the right answer at the moment, no? Because I've, I think that we started to see some cases, no cases about the SEC, in the financial market, but these cases about basically the copyright of artists, basically of people, painters, basically you or musicians, basically the model have been training this data probably without asking any permission for basically this kind of data, and the model now has the ability to write, basically to produce music like any particular artist, or to write in a particular way, or to create paints basically in this way. So how you can, I will say, penalize, or I don't know if the word is penalized, but consider that basically one part of the data is one part of this artist creation is in the training data, and now that basically ChatGPT is producing output similar, how you can attribute the value of this data set to the training data, no? And this question of attribution, so how you can attribute the value of one given data set to the one that is, to the whole mass of the training data, basically it's a difficult challenge, no? It's a difficult challenge, apart from the regulatory side that we can face, no?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we say like one of the point that so we know that finance is very regulated, no? And every time that, for example, we say something about a financial strategy, we need to say that basically probably the past don't repeat in the future, you know, that this is not
It's not.
this is a toy example, something like that. And for example, I have seen people using ChatGPT. Right now, I don't see it too much, but like 6 months ago, 1 year ago, trying to use ChatGPT to recommend stock market, to pick stocks, no? And basically, you ask ChatGPT, today is the date, and I have some money. How do I allocate my money between Tesla and Meta? You know? Some people were trying to backtest, no, but basically in the past, no, they weren't do it in the present moment, and following the recommendation that Ernie was given that you are going to lose money. Probably if you do that, you're going to suffer the pain.
Yeah.
No, but when you look in the past, basically ChatGPT was providing the right allocation, was picking the right stocks all the time or most of the time, no.
Mhm.
And what we tend to forget sometimes, like basically the answer, it could be already in the data, in the corpus that ChatGPT was using for training the model. So this cutoff date is very important because you don't know what is there, no? And how you can trust that, for example, imagine that I am developing a strategy in emerging markets, something like that, or something that I think ChatGPT is not using the data for. How can I be sure that the data is not present because we don't have any access, no? I think that use cases like that, if, for example, if ChatGPT is providing the answer by Tesla or do something similar, so could be a problem. So right now, what they do is like they add instruction basically to ChatGPT to say, okay, don't do that, don't provide don't provide financial advice, but even you can doing some advanced prompting, bypass this security part and
Oh, yeah.
jailbreak the model to
Yep.
provide you an answer. And this is
Yep. Yep.
this security flow that you can have in this language model, because at the end you are adding layers and layers and layers, but you don't know basically the layer that you added for security are enough. Probably someone know the layers and can jailbreak the system. As you know, basically in cybersecurity, it's like
No, certainly true. So the security aspect, I mean, we haven't even talked about that, and I realize we don't have the time to, but really security aspect of all of these. So this whole area of adversarial machine learning and the type of attacks, training attacks, test time attack, all sorts of different things. You can pollute, poison the data, and all sorts
yes.
of things that you can do to just fool. And in addition, prompt engineering, manipulation of the prompt engineering so that you can get beyond all sorts of the checks and balances built into the system. Yeah. But so, Ernie, you were going to say something. I have only one more question that somebody asked that I think will be important to ask, but please go ahead and then I will ask my last question.
I was just going to say that I think that large financial institution will use large language model to, let's say, approve or reject a loan is still far, because from my interaction with these institutions, their top priority is explainability of the AI model.
Yes.
And it's very hard to explain a model with several million parameters. So,
Yes.
That's right. That's right. That was another thing that shocked me. And now I realize it wasn't a shock, and I quickly realized it wasn't a shock. I had a friend, and the two of us, we were, educated in different ways, but he ended up going to JP Morgan, and I ended up being in academia. So there was a time when we were talking to each other, and then I talked to him about all these different machine learning based models for loan giving, other things, credibility, and things like that, and that perhaps he should take some of these to the leadership where he was working. And he came back saying that regression, linear regression, is the only thing, because, like explainability, interpretability, ease of understanding at least brings that feeling, the psychologically good feeling that you understand what's going on, as opposed to 7 billion, if not that, even 100,000 parameters saying something. Why, how, when, how. So, okay. So the last question is, for students and professionals entering the quant field, what skills will be most valuable in the AI powered era of quant finance, in this new era of quant finance? How would you recommend them to prepare themselves?
So I ask this question myself all the time. But but what I see in my work and basically following some of the trends and the technology that is developing at the moment, I say that it's very important basically to master the fundamentals. Basically, be a master on the fundamentals is really great because it can help you basically to pick any subject very fast. I will say pick any subject very fast. I will say like basically if you are interested in the field of machine learning AI, mastering probabilistic modeling basically is very important because you can pivot to any model you can build, you can understand, you can build agents, you can see how you can train them, and also the coding part. Even for example, if I will say that software engineering is one of the careers that basically in the news are, I will say that are in danger, no? Or people say that are in danger, no? For what I see is like is I will say is not true at the moment because the code that is developing that developed this model basically is kind of basically is not something that is scalable, something that probably you are going to put in production in industry, no? And basically for software engineering, there are some many ways, very, I will say standard way how you can develop code that is going to be these design patterns that allow you to change the code, some part of the code without modifying the complete code.
Mhm.
Some standard, very good standard that allow you to build this very complex model. And I don't see at the moment basically by coding like this complete, very complex code. And after you need to do a modification, how do you tell the model modify only this line of code without rewriting everything, no? And this is something that basically I see, no? And for me, this is like for the software part, not only study, for example, now probably learning the syntax of the code is not so important, but you need to learn basically how to write good code, basically how to basically write abstraction in the code, and after you can ask ChatGPT or Cursor, whatever tools, basically to write a specific function to solve a specific problem, but you are the architect, no, that is putting all the pieces together. Basically, in that way, for example, if we are at home and we want to try a quick back test, okay, you can do it and it's going to do it. But probably if you want to do something more complicated and deploy it for serving a million of requests per second or per minute, probably it's not going to work. I will say like master the fundamentals in whatever field you are and try to basically try to think in systems. No? Basically, I'm going to put the system together, how they are going to communicate, and at least this is the way how I try to approach the problem, and I see how it's evolving.
I also want to add that it's, the amount of knowledge to learn is, of course, fast and limitless. So I think it's important to start, get your hands dirty and work with someone in the industry, get an internship, and find out exactly what skills are important in that industry, right? So, I have found that, with our interns, they find out very quickly, what they don't know once they started the project, and they can then, focus on those knowledge. So, I think it's very hard if you don't have a concrete commercial problem to solve, and you just, that you just go to the library and read everything, because that's just limitless number of books to read.
No, absolutely right. That is why, in fact, in universities too, more and more we are trying to switch to project-based learning, even in the
Exactly.
fundamental areas, even if it is calculus, even if it is discrete
Mhm.
math, which oftentimes is the problematic parts and the bottlenecks in the education for engineers or, computer scientists and so on. It works much better. The learning happens much more efficiently and productively if you formulate it as a problem to be solved, as opposed to, let me tell
Exactly.
you about integration. No, don't tell me
Yeah.
about integration. Why do I need to integrate? What am I integrating? Why am
Like,
I integrating? Works much better.
yes, working on real problems is going to give you like experience, and basically once you work in many problems, you will have like some intuition. No, it's like now, for example, the array or the space of possible solution are many, but when you have experience, you say, I'm going to test this because you know that this is a good path to follow. Or if it's not the best path, it's going to give you information about what the best path is. And this you can gain it only with experience. So I remember that Ernie was talking once about basically informal learning, and he was mentioned that basically it doesn't matter how many papers you read, if you write the question, unless you try to implement it and play with the data and see why it's not training, why it's not working. Basically, there are many aspects that you see in real data that you don't see in the math. Basically, that you are not going to model, that you can only learn it basically in the field and take problems, try to solve it, challenge the hypothesis, see basically what you find in the data that is not in the mathematical assumption, try to challenge. This is a very good way to learn, I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And lose money.
Lose money also. If you are in trading, lose
Make
money.
sure you lose some money
Yes.
to engrave that learning into your brain. All right. It was absolutely wonderful talking to both of you. I don't want to say goodbye, but like it was such a pleasant time. Thank you very much for being here for this conversation. And hopefully, we're looking forward to the next book. If we can be of any sort of help as a community, please let us know. If you need any kind of, testing, proofreading, whatever, let us know. We'll see how we can help. So thank you very much and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. We enjoyed the conversation very
Thank you.
Thank you
much.
for inviting us.
Take care.